Hello and welcome to MEE Live. I'm Matilda Mallinson. It's Tuesday, the 7th of July, 2026. Today, an imminent massacre in Sudan and a world refusing to stop it. We'll look before at a positive turn for period poverty in Pakistan, but first, the headlines. French politician Rima Hassan appeared in court today to be tried for apology for terrorism. The MEP, who is half Palestinian, was charged for posting a quote on X by Japanese militant Kozo Akamoto, who was convicted for his involvement in the Lod airport attack, which killed 26 people in Israel in 1972. The quote read, "As long as there is oppression, resistance will not only be a right, but a duty." Proceedings were adjourned until October. MEE journalist Pauline Ertel was at the courthouse.
I am here in front of the Tribunal de Paris, the court in Paris. About 300 people have showed up to express their solidarity with Rima Hassan and with Palestinians. As Rima entered the courthouse, she addressed the crowd saying that the allegations she is facing is not only an attack on herself and on her parliamentary immunity, but also on the very freedom of expression and democracy itself.
This charge of apology for terrorism is one of the most pernicious types of legal warfare that can be waged against our movement. We need to be very attentive in pushing back and appealing and standing together in a moment like this when one of our own is right now in front of judges who have little regard for constitutional rights here in France, but the fundamental rights of Palestinians more specifically.
I am here because there is a very strong attack on pro-Palestine movement in France, and this is why I think it's very important to defend Rima and also all the people that are now judged under false accusation of anti-Semitism.
Merci. Rima, Paris est avec toi.
Fears are mounting for arbitrarily detained Palestinian doctor Hussam Abu Safia. Amidst reports, his life is in grave danger. Israeli forces arrested the paediatrician in December 2024 and have held him in prison since without charge or trial. His lawyer returned from his latest visit saying Safia had told him, "This is the last time you will see me. They brought me here to kill me." Amnesty International has called on Israeli authorities to immediately release the medic, describing details of his treatment as truly horrifying, including severe torture and prolonged solitary isolation. About 100 protesters gathered in Israel's Tel Aviv, joining calls for his immediate release. And finally, a debate on slavery reparations has been revived here in the UK. Did you know Britain actually did pay slavery reparations? It just wasn't to the people enslaved. The debate was revived when former Home Secretary Suella Braverman called on ex-colonies to pay the British back. In a somewhat muddled argument on X, the Reform politician said former colonies should repay their old colonial ruler for investment. In the same post, she rejected slavery reparations because to expect the British people of the 21st century to pay for actions that took place in the 18th century has no basis in law. Contradictions aside, on this point, she's wrong. Until as late as 2018, British taxpayers were still paying compensation to slave owners, not those enslaved. The £20 million debt dates back to 1835 and amounted to 5% of GDP at the time. Braverman's post was a response to Labour MP Bel Ribeiro Addy, who posted that Jamaica will take their call for slavery reparations to King Charles later this year. Approximately 1.5 million kidnapped Africans were transported to Jamaica by British slave traders, where historians estimate the overwhelming majority died due to the brutality of their treatment. By the time Britain decided to reimburse slave owners, there were only about 300,000 survivors. Do you know what period poverty is? In Pakistan, only 12% of women use commercial sanitary products, and only a quarter understand their period to be a natural biological process. Period poverty is not just a lack of resources, but of education and freedom to deal with something existential for women. Menstruation is often shrouded in stigma and silence, but it is also actively exploited when governments levy taxes on basic sanitation. But in Pakistan, an 18% sales tax on sanitary products has just been revoked in a victory for women's rights campaigners. It followed a constitutional petition, a public campaign, and years of grassroots work on an issue many in Pakistan have long refused to discuss out loud. The change is significant, but campaigners say it is incomplete. An MEE report this week by Florence Ingleby tells the story of the people fighting this battle. My guest today is one of them. Mahnur Omar is the human rights activist who launched the constitutional petition along with tax lawyer Ahsan Jahangir Khan. She joins me now. Mahnur, welcome to MEE Live. Can you just tell us, what does period poverty actually look like on a day-to-day basis?
Thank you for having me. And as you said brilliantly, period poverty has it doesn't just start or end with resources, but those resources are of no good if women don't know why they should be using menstrual products such as pads and tampons as opposed to cheaper alternatives like reusing dirty cloth rags. And this is a system, period poverty is a system that unfortunately has been a cycle, I would say, that's been going on for far too long. Illiteracy, not having awareness about how to take care of your health, about what menstruation is. I remember that even while I was studying in I would say, a very well-to-do private school for my middle schooling, there was girls in my class that would get their period and would be crying and would be shocked. They wouldn't know what it is. And the teachers, instead of having an open conversation about it to the snickering boys and snickering girls even, would just hush it away and say, okay, run to the bathroom. Don't let anybody see your shame. It's a system that I think perpetuates women being isolated from their life, from economic opportunities, from sports, from education. A UNICEF report in Pakistan, I think from 2024, says 1 in 5 girls miss school because of their periods. It's seen as something to be ashamed of. And also religiously speaking, there's also certain misconceptions that it makes you impure. You can't pray during your period. You can't go into a mosque or temple during your period. Yes, perhaps those religious convictions are true, but that doesn't mean you can't go to school, or you can't, go work, or you can't be in public at all. And so it's a vicious cycle of just not caring about women's health and not informing them because education is power, and that is power taken away from women and young girls.
I suppose that's why you don't just use the word period poverty in your campaigning, but the word menstrual injustice, which is a little bit more active in its terminology. Now, you successfully took this battle from the household to a constitutional petition to the floor of Parliament and finally law. What were the biggest obstacles that you faced?
The first obstacle I would say that SN and I faced was a fight with the government in itself to have our case accepted. The jurisdiction came to be an issue where the government now that, proudly is saying that this is an essential item and we're proud to stand by women's rights, initially was very reluctant to even let our case be heard. Our case started in September of 2025 and it dragged on for months because of them refusing to issue a reply. It's like the battle of the forms, we call it as lawyers, right? So until the government gave an official reply, para by para, to our petition and our arguments, the case could not proceed. So that was the first thing, to get our respondents really to take us seriously. Secondly, the backlash societal, speaking about society, it is a taboo, it is a stigmatized topic. But here I do want to add, to my utter surprise, it's been very positive. There was obviously some trolls, some people who said, this is a very trivial topic. Who cares if they use pads or don't use pads? They're not going to die. Well, actually, they can die. Period poverty does take lives. Menstrual injustice does take lives. When you get infections, when you get diseases and you don't even have access to healthcare because of you being in a far-flung rural area, when you are excluded from economic opportunities or schooling. These are all interconnected issues. But backlash-wise, I would say I've been very shocked. But I felt that young men and young women especially, have been very supportive of this petition from the very start.
Well, that's encouraging to hear. So now the 18% sales tax is gone. What does that change for women and girls in Pakistan? And what does it not change? What still needs to be done?
So, as a lawyer, we're not very good at math, but I can say 18% isn't a very large amount, right? So 18% tax being removed doesn't change the entire system. It's not that women will now be flocking to the store and switching out alternatives to buy pads. No. But what I do think that it is a win, symbolically speaking, because I personally believe that before June of 2026, the word menstruation, the word Mahabari, has never been uttered on the National Assembly floor. And to have our male finance minister speak of this so openly, I think sets a very important precedent. It sets a precedent that the government is finally willing to take women's health seriously. I also want to add that our legal battle is not over. The judgment on this case is still yet to be written by Justice Jawad of the Lahore High Court. We are rallying, we are advocating, and we are fighting for them to be completely tax-free. Therefore, this means there will be no customs tax, no value-added tax, no tax of any sorts on them. Currently, super absorbent polymer paper and other raw materials used in creating such period products are normally imported into Pakistan. And in an ideal world, I would like to live in a country perhaps like Scotland, where these products are free. So that would be the most ideal situation. But right now, this in itself is still a win. It can be used as a precedent to now advocate for other issues when it comes to polycystic ovary syndrome and other health problems that women have and young girls have, sex education even.
You said that menstruation has never before been uttered on the floor of the Punjab Assembly. How significant is that? And I suppose another issue here is that women hold just 66 seats in Pakistan's Punjab Assembly out of 371. So how relevant is that question of representation to this wider issue of period poverty all over the country?
Yes, so the Punjab Assembly comment that I made, which also kind of everyone was sending me a screenshot off of the ME Twitter, was actually, I made that comment because the Chief Minister of Punjab, which can fit many, many European countries, is a woman. But it's not the Punjab Assembly that brought this change, it's the National Assembly, although I don't think this word has been uttered on either floors. And it's quite disappointing. And the evidence is here. In the Sales Tax Act, 1990, there's a sixth schedule. In that sixth schedule, there's a list of essential items. These essential items in the Sales Tax Act are tax exempt. You know what's in that list? Bovine semen, which is used for cattle farming, processed cheese. How is it that you have these other not essential items, I might argue, in that list, but you don't have something as basic as pads, as tampons, as menstrual products? And so debates in parliament, I think in Pakistan also need to take a turn where I, as a young activist and as a woman and as a citizen of the country, I demand for our representatives, especially our women representatives, to bring these topics up and to have open discussions on what laws are gender responsive and what aren't.
Now, finally, Mahnur, you were named on Time magazine's Women of the Year list. Does this recognition signify meaningful change is underway?
This recognition has honestly been an honor. It's been very flattering, and I aim to use it as I would say an important bargaining chip, because I think it places on me a certain responsibility now to sort of be, I would say, a little internationally well-known activist, where I feel I have a stronger platform now to voice my concerns. And I am very grateful to journalists, to the media, because I don't think it's just our legal petition that got the parliament to make this change. I also think it's international and national media pressure. When a conversation is going so viral, it's obviously these parliamentarians are scrolling through the same apps as we are. They're looking at what the world is saying and they know the world is watching. So with this recognition, I think my resolve to advocate for gender responsive legislation and ending the injustice that comes by virtue of the law is now stronger. And it's just the start, really, of my journey, I think, as a lawyer and as an activist.
Mahnur Omar, thank you so much for your time. Now on to updates from the US war on Iran. 2 tankers have been struck by projectiles in the Strait of Hormuz as tensions mount over stagnant US-Iran peace negotiations. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said talks will not begin if threats continue after US President Donald Trump declared Washington will reach an agreement with Tehran or, quote, finish the job. ME's editor-in-chief David Hurst argues Trump's contradictory signals about peace with Iran reflect competing influences within the administration over hopes for regime change in Tehran.
In the space of 10 days, Donald Trump has signed 2 mutually contradictory agreements to end his war on Iran. The power Israel lost to dictate the terms of peace on Iran, it sought to regain in Lebanon. It was helped enormously by the Lebanese government, which signed away both sovereignty over its land and its duty to seek legal redress for the war crimes Israel has committed. Under the deal that Donald Trump signed with the Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian, Washington agreed to an immediate and permanent termination of military operations on all fronts, including Lebanon, end quotes. That commitment makes the second deal signed a week ago in Washington between representatives of the Lebanese, Israeli and US governments obsolete. This framework gives Israeli forces occupying large areas of southern Lebanon indefinite leave to remain. In the first deal, the US promised to respect Iranian sovereignty, including over the Strait of Hormuz. In the second deal, its ally, Israel, has no obligation to respect Lebanese sovereignty, which is further weakened by the creation of a military coordination group run in Washington. The Lebanese army, kept deliberately weak by the veto Washington has over the weapons it uses, they're frightened that whatever weapons it has could fall into the hands of Hezbollah, is duty-bound to disarm Hezbollah, seen by many in Lebanon as the only credible deterrent against Israeli attack and settlement. If that was not bad enough, Lebanon will grant immunity to Israeli troops and generals over the war crimes committed in the invasion. More than 1 million people have been forcibly displaced in Lebanon since October 2023, and at least 8,000 have been killed. Many of Israel's strikes have targeted civilians, including journalists and healthcare workers. There was fury on the streets of Beirut, so much so that Prime Minister Nawaf Salam was obliged to thank Nabi Berri Berry, the Speaker of Parliament, for calming things down. Berry vowed to block the deal's passage to avert a potential civil war. Given Lebanon's history, this warning should not be taken lightly. Berry said the region would pay the price for what he called a tug of war inside the US administration. The two deals are so different because they have two different authors who compete with each other in the US administration, engaged in the tug of war that Berry was talking about. Trump's deal with Iran reflects the thinking of Vice President J.D. Vance, who must feel vindicated by the failure of airstrikes to achieve regime change in Iran. Vance was opposed to the whole idea from the start and was conspicuous by his absence from the Situation Room in February when Trump made the decision to launch the war. The Lebanon deal was the work of Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He continues to be signed up to the goal of regime change in Iran, as he was in Venezuela and still is in Cuba. Vance sees too many downsides to continuing the bombing campaign in Iran, not the least of which is the need to replenish global oil stock, the hammering that over 20 US military sites in the region took from Iranian missiles and drones, and the time it will take to replenish its stock of Tomahawk missiles. Rubio, on the other hand, persists in the myth that Hezbollah is foreign to Lebanon and is merely a tool of Iran. The Iran war was a clear setback to Israel's regional plans. But as night follows day, the political establishment in Israel has turned its sights on Turkey. This is a clearest sign that even if Israel had achieved regime change in Tehran, the war would not have stopped. It would simply have moved onto a different stage. So now Turkey has become the latest existential threat to Israel. As if in unison, a chorus of Israeli politicians has raised the alarm about a new Sunni axis opening up, composed of Turkey, Syria, and Qatar. This has not gone down well with Trump, who had little hesitation in laughing off the notion that his best friend, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, was an anti-Semitic dictator, as Netanyahu now claims. Erdogan is a great leader, a very strong person. Everything I've asked from him, he's done, Trump said. When Netanyahu said Israel's new security doctrine was to kill them first, Vance was even blunter. He said, "You're a country of 9 million people. You can't just kill your way out of solving every single national security problem." But Israel is as serious about setting on Turkey as it was about bombing Iran. Firstly, the rhetoric against Turkey is bipartisan. It's the leitmotif of one of the two men who could replace Netanyahu, Naftali Bennett. He said Turkey and Qatar have gained influence in Syria and are seeking influence elsewhere. "From here I warn," he said, "Turkey is the new Iran." Secondly, the groundwork for Israel's latest campaign came when, a month before the fall of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, Foreign Minister Gideon Saar said Israel should reach out to its natural allies, the Kurds and the Druze. When Assad fell, Israel bombarded and obliterated the Syrian Navy and Air Force and invaded an area of southern Syria larger than Gaza. Tel Aviv openly pushed for a weakened federal Syria, fragmented into confessional cantons. Netanyahu now calls the land his forces occupy in Lebanon, Syria and Gaza security belts, from which he has no intention of withdrawing. Israel has also consciously tried to reanimate tensions between Greece and Turkey over Cyprus and the eastern Mediterranean, including by supplying Cyprus with Barak MX air defense missiles. All of these moves have one common goal: to challenge Turkey's rising naval power. A recent Ma'arif article argued that Turkey is increasingly being seen in Israeli strategic circles as a more significant long-term challenge than Iran. Another Israeli minister, Gila Gamiel, has said that Israel was preparing to confront what she said was the Ottoman Empire. Turkey's reaction to Israel's moves has been cautious, some would say too much so. Put Erdogan's rhetoric to one side and consider what Turkey actually did when Israel invaded Syria and bombed its air force and navy. Its reaction was to talk, to agree on a
Okay. I'm afraid we had a little glitch in the system there, but you can catch the rest of that piece on Middle East Eye's YouTube. Now to Sudan. After the el-Fasher massacre in Sudan, the blood could be seen from space. Now world leaders are being warned the next el-Fasher is waiting to happen unless they urgently act. When el-Fasher was captured in October by the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, The UN said 6,000 people were killed in the first 3 days alone. They said it bore the hallmarks of genocide.
These crimes were foreseen with repeated warnings by myself and my office, but they were not prevented. This is not a drill. It is a red alert that needs to land on the desks of heads of state and government around.
The fall of el-Fasher followed an 18-month siege of the city. Now, 500,000 people are trapped in another siege of the city of el-Obeid. The RSF controls routes in and out, aid is suspended, drone strikes at record intensity, and paramilitary troops are building up. We have been here before, and we failed to act. That's what one human rights investigator testified to UK lawmakers. Nathaniel Raymond said the British government had prioritised relations with the UAE over stopping mass atrocities in Sudan. The UAE is widely believed to be backing the RSF and is one of the UK's biggest buyers of weapons that have been found on the sites of Sudan's massacres. Nathaniel Raymond, director of Yale's Humanitarian Research Lab, joins me now. Nathaniel, welcome to MEE Live. Nathaniel, can you hear me? I think you've just joined the stream. Nathaniel, I just want to double check that you can hear me before I fire the first question.
Yep, I can hear you.
Oh, great. Welcome to MEE Live. You say that the UK is putting UAE relations over Sudanese life. Just explain, why would the UK do this? What do we get from the UAE?
Well, what the United Kingdom gets by prioritizing the UAE relationship above civilian protection in Sudan is diplomatic, economic, and security advantages. But the fact of the matter is that the United Kingdom is treaty bound by international law to protect civilians, particularly from the threat of genocide. And so basically what's happened is a choice. And the UK has made the choice that the UAE matters more than Sudanese lives.
Now, of course, the UAE categorically denies providing military or financial support to the RSF. So on what basis do experts like yourself believe the UAE is perpetuating atrocities in Sudan?
Well, I could list out for you a mountain of evidence, but I'll just give you one point, which is on October 28th of 2025, the Wall Street Journal reported leaked U.S. intelligence assessments from the State Department's Intelligence and Research Bureau and the Defense Intelligence Agency, which confirms U.S. intelligence finding that the UAE is responsible for arming the RSF, and confirms the work of our lab at the Humanitarian Research Lab here at Yale, identifying a CH-95 strategic drone that U.S. intelligence believes was transferred from UAE to the RSF. So it's the internal finding of U.S. intelligence that the UAE is responsible for giving the RSF the capacity and capabilities that led to the genocidal massacre in el-Fasher. That's fact. And so at the end of the day, we know that UAE, as you heard in my testimony 2 weeks ago in front of UK Parliament, that flights from Sudan to Ethiopia were going to mineral import-export facilities controlled by Abdul Rahim Dagalo inside Abu Dhabi. These are facts. And so at the end of the day, the war could end in 2 weeks if the international community cut off the supply line to the RSF from the UAE.
Do we know why? Why does the UAE support the RSF? What does the UAE stand to gain from war in Sudan?
Really three advantages. One is geopolitical positioning within the Gulf region, but the second is really resources. And that's probably the most driving reason for the UAE is gold, copper, water. At the end of the day, the UAE is benefiting immensely from the rich resources of Sudan, particularly in the Darfur region. The third is that UAE is locked in a competition with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and KSA supports SAF, and now UAE supports SAF's adversary, the RSF.
Now, over the past week, we have seen a surge in diplomatic efforts to address the imminent crisis in el-Obeid. A rare urgent debate was held at the Human Rights Council in Geneva on Friday. That was on the request of the UK. Is this the kind of progress that you're talking about?
Well, I would give them a C+. They're having the emergency meetings, they're having the warnings, but they're only going halfway. They're not talking about the solution. And the solution is cutting off the weapons highway that is currently fast-tracking resources into the RSF, but also to the SAF. At the end of the day, the siege in el-Obeid is just one instance of the RSF business model. They pay their soldiers in loot. And so that means they have every incentive in the world to keep paying their men by attacking cities that is going to allow them to pay them in loot. Until the business model of the RSF doesn't work anymore, it will continue. And these urgent debates are better than no debates at all, but they aren't solutions.
It's just, as you point out, like, this is a very, very, very complex scenario in Sudan. There's plenty of external interests playing into it. Egypt quietly backs the Sudanese armed forces. Saudi Arabia and Qatar are aligned, as you say. It interlocks with Horn of Africa rivalries. There's a lot of foreign powers standing to profit from the lucrative minerals trades that you've described coming out of Sudan, gum arabic, gold. I think this gives many onlookers the impression that what's happening in Sudan is unsolvable, let alone comprehensible. Maybe that's one of the reasons it's so underreported. What would you say to people who think this appears to be an unsolvable problem?
Well, that's the critical question, and I would answer quite simply: when things get complex, that's why human rights standards and international law exist, to make our obligations simple. Things were complicated 20 years ago when the United Nations Security Council, despite those complexities diplomatically, came together to deploy a protection force called UNAMID that saved hundreds of thousands of lives by creating safe havens in el-Fasher and elsewhere in Zamzam. But once the political will that created a really clear response to a complex problem went away, those same camps, Abu Shuk, al-Salam, and Zamzam, that were once safe havens for the survivors of the Darfur genocide, became their graveyards.
And why do you think that it appears to be so difficult to get not just British lawmakers, but lawmakers in general, sufficiently engaged in what is happening in Sudan?
I think it's two things. One is there's no public demand from the British or the American public like there was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, George Clooney was getting arrested in front of the Sudanese embassy in Washington over Darfur. Samantha Power was talking to thousands of students on the National Mall. Now there's no bracelets, there's no chants, there's no signs in the yard. It's the lack of a demand from the public, combined with the fact that it's easier. As I said to UK Parliament 2 weeks ago, it was easier for the Foreign Office to prioritize UAE because there was no consequence to it. At the end of the day, until they're burning Manchester City jerseys on the streets of Hull, nothing is going to change.
I am sort of fascinated myself by the lack of engagement from the British electorate, because one issue that, and I suppose I speak as a member of the British electorate, one issue that we seem to care a lot about is the question of so-called illegal immigration, of small boats crossing the Channel. And one of the main nationalities populating those boats is, of course, Sudanese people. Sudanese people are among the top 5 nationalities represented on those routes. Can you help us, firstly, I suppose, understand why? Are there alternative routes for people fleeing the genocidal violence in Sudan?
Well, it's important when you see that type of migration to understand that those are the lucky ones. Those are the ones with the resources to pay the coyotes, the smugglers, to get them out. And they're usually the middle class or the upper class that have the resources to run. It's the poorest in the population with the least skills in terms of not being doctors, lawyers, or business owners that can't flee. And why are they coming to the shores of the United Kingdom? They're coming seeking safety and a better life for their children. At the end of the day, the law is clear, the international law under the Refugee Convention, that people seeking asylum in times of war have a right to safety. The fact of the matter, if you want to solve the refugee problem, solve the war. And the only way to solve the war is by confronting the United Kingdom's strategic ally, which is the UAE, who's backing a genocidal militia.
Mm-hmm. And just then, quickly, why do you think that we are so unsuccessful at joining the dots? Is that a question for the media? Is that a question for politicians, for the public? I mean, the dots between all of the coverage we give to illegal immigration on our horizon and what happens beyond that horizon in Sudan, where people are being forced to flee their homes.
At the end of the day, when we fail in the face of mass atrocity, it's the responsibility of all sectors of society, from government to the media to civil society to the people on the street. At the end of the day, we are all culpable. And so the beginning of change really begins with organization. And what happened in Save Darfur, why it worked, is because people organized, particularly in the United States on the Republican right, were the major drivers in the Republican administration of political change, because there was a demand primarily from the evangelical community. At the end of the day, the way to start is by starting with organization to make that demand known to your elected leaders, and then things will change.
And so just before we wrap this interview, Nathaniel, as there is this push for diplomatic urgency around what's happening in Sudan, what can the ordinary person at home do to get involved?
Write a letter. Write a letter, make a phone call. As someone who's worked really closely with US Congress and with the UK Parliament, they read their mail and they listen to their voicemails. At the end of the day, if you're outraged, communicate that. Simply sitting at home, cracking a beer and saying, well, this is awful, makes you complicit. Call your elected representatives and tell them you want to see pressure on the UAE and you want to see pressure for an end to the Sudan war now.
Nathaniel Raymond, thank you so much for joining me. Now, we are just waiting a few minutes to get our second guest on Sudan. So before we hear from her, we have one more video that we would like to play you from MEE's YouTube collection that you can find if you just go to our channel. And that is with Andreas Krieg. And Middle East Eye sat down with Andreas Krieg for the fourth time on Unapologetic. This time in the aftermath of the war on Iran, to ask what it has done to the overriding balance of power across the Middle East. His answer was stark, which is why we're sharing it with you now. He says it has undone the American empire in a way he does not think that it can recover from. Here he is.
You think the IRGC wants a lasting peace deal? Because
possibly, because I think fighting all the time could be problematic.
Yeah, well, peace deal means they don't want to continue fighting, but they also don't want to. I think they're quite happy with a limbo state for an extended period of time, which makes it very bad, where the sort of state we're in. Because here you have a Trump administration with no patience, an impulsive man surrounded by sycophants, and you'd be surprised to see how much of a micromanager Trump is in the negotiation even. You'd think he delegated that to J.D. Vance. That's not the truth. Ultimately, it's still Donald Trump who micromanages it. So his perception very much matters. And he's never been, if you look at his art of the deal, which is, it's a joke really, if you look what has been achieved or not achieved in Iran, is like the opposite of the art of surrender in many ways. But, he's up against the IRGC and an Iranian bazaar mentality, if you will. And I'm not saying that in a derogative way. It's the idea that everything is up for negotiation, right? The price is not agreed until you sign the contract, and you might never sign a contract. That it's stalling. It's also the ability of them not to say no, because that's part of the negotiation tactic, right? They're not going to say no. They say yes. Why not? We're quite happy to meet. But that meeting could go. You might be in a spiral or in a loop of never-ending conversation around the same topic without ever coming to a resolution, because it keeps it buys them time. It buys them momentum. And it's also an extremely complex state. And, I always describe Iran as a network state. It's not hierarchical in the sense that Saddam's Iraq was, or even the UAE are in many ways. It's not authoritarian. It is authoritarian in that way, but not in terms of, there's not one omnipotent man. It's not an
So
autocracy.
there isn't a supreme leader.
There is a supreme leader, but he's one hub of power that's surrounded, like a satellite, by smaller hubs of power that all report to that sort of idea of the supreme leader. When we can talk about Mujtaba Khamenei as a supreme leader, which has been somewhat in hiding for the last 4 months. So he has an impact over negotiations, but ultimately what they have to do is they have to find consensus within to then go and negotiate. And it's not Arakchi and Ghalibaf who I think have, in pretty much, from what I hear from negotiators, have really negotiated in earnest and in good faith and with trust. These guys are just the front of a very, very diverse spectrum of opinions in Iran, and different hubs of power having different interests, even within the IRGC. So Wahidi is certainly, as the new IRGC chief, one of the most powerful men in the country, but he himself has to manage a network of different entities and opinions and ideologies within the IRGC. We always talk about hardliners and less hardliners. I mean, this is a country of hardliners, harder liners, and hardest liners. There isn't any soft liners anymore in Iran. And that there is a collection of different opinions of whether you even should negotiate with the United States. Because, for 50 years nearly, they've been, the big Satan has been the United States. Now you're meeting directly with them and you're potentially making concessions. And there are some who say we should stay in this permanent state of procrastination, because procrastination is what Iranian negotiation has always been about. If you look at the long process that got us to the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal in 2015, you see that there was stalling, procrastination, deference, and ultimately you got to a deal after a long process. And at that time, it was the Omanis who were hosting it. And this, if you look at the mindset of Iran, and you're then looking at Donald Trump, who anyway only has two and a half years left in office, the Iranians they might just play on time and say, let's see how long this goes. But I want to say that there is a unique opportunity, and there are some in the IRGC who realize that, and that goes back to the thing I said when we last spoke in January about the idea that the IRGC, or that even the United States giving the IRGC, making the Iranians an offer that is so good, is better than any offer I think the Iranians have received in the last 50 years. An offer that ultimately sees a comprehensive deal about the nuclear issue, a comprehensive deal over some sort of containment of capabilities, but not surrendering capabilities. This is not a dictate of Versailles. This is not a complete surrender of the Iranians, obviously. But there is a scenario where people in the administration around J.D. Vance, even Kushner and Witkoff and others, believe that there is a potential to build a gateway into a market that is untapped, the biggest market in the region by far in terms of consumers, a highly sophisticated market with massive human capital, probably more sophisticated human capital than you would get in any other country in the region. And large, massive size. Obviously, people always focus on the energy sector. There's so much more. There's science, there's tech. And the Iranians have been able to maintain this despite the fact that they've been under the most cruel sanction regime for decades. And so lifting sanctions, opening up that market, opening it up to outside investors. I'm not saying that lifting sanctions will immediately bring trillions of dollars into the economy, but you can build up. And if that opening up comes gradually, there is an immense potential for the Iranians and this regime, for the IRGC in particular, which runs most of the economy, to profit from this. Build an economy that serves the people, serves itself, keeps itself in power, and build an Iran that is probably more powerful than it has been for a century. And so and this is why I'm thinking there must be some in the IRGC who understand that this could be at the end of this process. I think this is a massive incentive that people downplay and say, "Oh, that's never going to happen." And this is a U.S. administration that wants out. I think Trump has been, what he's made in terms of concessions for this MOU is quite remarkable. It's all, everyone, the Israelis, but also on the left, people say, "Oh, that's a surrender document." But, I don't want to frame it that way because Trump doesn't like the sort of narrative of surrender. He certainly doesn't see it that way. It's also an opportunity for the Iranians. It's an opportunity for the United States. It's an opportunity for the region. Unless you sit in Israel, you probably see this as a massive opportunity now.
That was Andreas Krieg speaking on Unapologetic. To find the rest of the episode, go to MEE's YouTube page. For today, that is all that we have time for. But to all of you watching, thanks for tuning in. Like, subscribe, make sure you're following us on social media at Middle East Eye. You can email meelive@middleeasteye.net. I'll be here live at 5 every Tuesday and Thursday, noon if you're in New York. See you then.